Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
She miraculously survived when the bus plunged into a ravine, endured a year in the Andes. And when she returned, she found her husband with a lover in her apartment and her mother in a nursing home. But what happened next? The spoon slipped from Isabel's hand and clattered onto the ceramic kitchen floor. The sharp sound snapped her out of her thoughts and back into the reality of her apartment in the Los Riberas residential complex. The clock read 7:15. On the fridge, among magnets from different cities, one photo stood out, she and Diego against the backdrop of the snow-capped Andes, young, full of hope, smiling sincerely. That was 3 years ago, when infertility felt like a temporary hurdle, not a never-ending road of disappointment. Isabel absent-mindedly placed a hand on her stomach as she stirred coffee for her husband. Over the past year, Diego had changed, become distant, stayed late at work, avoided conversations about having a child, replacing them with practical talk about the mortgage. First the apartment, then the kids, his new mantra, and every time he said it, something inside Isabel seemed to break. Diego entered the kitchen already dressed, his hair damp from the shower. "Good morning," he said, casting a quick glance at the wall clock. "I made you an omelet," Isabel said, placing the plate on the table, trying to smile. "I arranged with Ana Vasquez to work from home today so I can make it to the clinic by 5. She watched as her husband began eating, carefully avoiding her gaze. "You haven't forgotten, have you? Dr. Luz insisted we both come." Diego set down his fork, his shoulders tensing ever so slightly. "Sorry, I can't today. We're launching a new project, important client meeting." "The third time this month," Isabel said softly. "Maybe you just don't want a child?" "Let's not do this now," Diego said, reaching for his coffee. "You know we have to pay off the mortgage before." His phone, lying on the table, buzzed. On the screen flashed the name Marina and the beginning of a message, "Buenos dias. Te espero en." Isabel didn't catch the rest of the message. Diego quickly flipped the phone face down, but it was too late. She had seen enough. Something cold and heavy settled inside her. "It's work," he said quickly, though she hadn't asked. "Marina, that's the new marketing manager?" Isabel's voice was deceptively calm. "Yes, we're working on a presentation together." Diego finished his coffee and stood up. "I have to go, big day today." The phone buzzed again. Diego grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, clearly eager to leave. "Reschedule the appointment, okay? I'll definitely come with you next week." "Lo permito." He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and headed for the door. Isabel stared at the closed door, feeling her familiar world cracking along invisible seams. Maybe it wasn't just about the new manager, but the way Diego avoided her eyes when talking about her, how he hid his phone, how he recoiled from touch in the evenings. She picked the photo off the fridge. Who were those two happy people standing in the Andes? And when did they start becoming strangers to each other? The glass walls of the Panorama Business Center reflected the bright morning sun as Isabel rode the elevator up to her office. At the last moment, she had decided not to stay home. There were too many thoughts there, too little space for the growing anxiety. The office awaited her with quarterly reports, numbers, and graphs, things that always helped her escape personal turmoil. The financial analyst in her craved clear data that could be organized, unlike the chaos of her family life. "How's the report on Technoservice coming along?" Ana Vasquez asked, poking her head into Isabel's office just before lunch. "Almost done," Isabel rubbed her temple, where a dull headache had begun to pulse. "It'll be ready by morning." "Are you feeling okay?" Her boss lingered in the doorway, studying her carefully. "You look pale." "I'm fine, just didn't sleep much," Isabel forced a smile. "And I need to make it to the clinic by 5. "Then go now," Ana Vasquez said unexpectedly. "The report can wait until tomorrow." Isabel nodded gratefully. "Maybe this is a sign?" "Finish early, drop by Diego's office, convince him to go to the clinic with me." At the Vita Plus clinic, Dr. Luz greeted her without enthusiasm. "Still without your husband?" She shook her head, flipping through the test results. Isabel, I have to be honest with you. We've completed all the necessary examinations and found no physiological reason for your infertility. It's now critically important that your husband undergo a full evaluation too. As she stepped out of the doctor's office, Isabel made a decision. She would go directly to Diego's office. If he really had an important meeting, she would wait. Maybe she could catch him when he was done and finally talk to him. The IT department was on the 15th floor of the same Panorama Business Center where Isabel worked. The transparent partitions between the offices gave the space a sense of openness, which now struck Isabel as bitterly ironic. She approached Diego's office and noticed the door was slightly ajar. Reaching out to knock, she heard a woman's laughter. A familiar laugh from the last company party, bright and husky. "Crees que ella sospecha algo?" The voice was confident, with a smug edge. "Isabel?" Diego chuckled. "She's too busy with her pregnancy tests and doctor visits. Even if I confessed, she'd just ask if I could swing by the clinic in between." Isabel froze, her hands suspended in midair. Her face flushed, her ears rang. "Cuando es lo dirás?" Marina continued. "I'm tired of hiding." All in good time, Diego's voice was soft, intimate, a tone Isabel hadn't heard from him in months. "First we wrap up the project, get the bonuses." Isabel pushed the door open. Diego sat at his desk, and Marina, the glamorous marketing manager with flawless makeup, was perched on the edge of it, her hand resting on his shoulder. They both froze when they saw Isabel. "Important meeting with clients?" Isabel asked quietly, feeling a strange calm, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. "Isabel?" Diego jumped to his feet, his face contorting in surprise and fear. "¿Qué haces aquí?" Marina straightened up but didn't remove her hand from Diego's shoulder. Her expression held no embarrassment, only annoyance at the interruption. "I came to remind my husband about the doctor's appointment," Isabel said, glancing at Marina. "But I see he really is in a very important meeting." "You know, I'm tired of hiding," Marina suddenly said, looking straight at Isabel. "Diego and I have been together for 6 months, and I'm done being a secret." Isabel turned her gaze to her husband. His face was frozen in an unreadable expression, a mixture of guilt, anger, and relief. 6 months? Isabel repeated, feeling something inside her tear. "That's exactly when we started our last round of treatment." She noticed how a few colleagues behind the glass partitions quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be busy. They knew. They all knew. "I can explain," Diego said, stepping toward her. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what she thinks," Marina cut in. "Why basta de mentir, Diego? I'm not going to be your dirty secret anymore." Isabel realized she couldn't stay there a moment longer. The air in the office had grown thick, impossible to breathe. Without another word, she turned and walked out, feeling the stares of dozens of coworkers on her back. How many of them knew? How long had they known? And why hadn't anyone told her? The elevator felt like a lifeboat. The doors closed, cutting her off from the world that had just collapsed. Isabel leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. He really said that? Pregnancy tests? Elena handed Isabel a glass of wine, settling beside her on the wide sofa in her loft apartment. "Que canela?" Isabel took a sip of dry white wine. "You know what hurts the most?" She stared into the darkness beyond the window, where the city lights flickered. "I suspected it. All those late nights at work, the hidden messages, the excuses about the clinic. I just didn't want to believe it." Elena, her childhood friend, the only person Isabel had called after leaving the business center, squeezed her hand sympathetically. 6 months, Elena, Isabel continued. This whole time, while I was running from doctor to doctor, he was sleeping with her. And judging by the looks in the office, everyone knew. Everyone but me. So what now? Elena asked quietly. Are you going back home? Isabel shook her head. Not today. Maybe never. Elena stood up and walked over to her desk. She returned with a glossy brochure. Remember I told you I won a trip in that giveaway? Las Sierras Azules, a luxury resort in the mountains. She handed the brochure to Isabel. On the cover, majestic snow-covered Andean peaks, cozy chalets, a spa complex. Elena, I can't just run away. Why not? Elena sat down beside her. You need time. Time to think, away from him, from the office, from everyone who knew and said nothing. 2 weeks in the mountains, fresh air, no stress. Then you can decide. Isabel's phone rang. On the screen, Mom. Maria called every evening to check in on her daughter. Isabel took a deep breath and answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Hi, Mom. Yes, I'm fine. I just stayed a bit late at Elena's. No, nothing serious, we're discussing a project. Diego? He's at work, of course. She couldn't bring herself to tell her mother the truth. Maria had recently suffered a minor stroke, and the doctors had strongly advised her to avoid stress. News of her beloved son-in-law's betrayal could be a serious blow. After hanging up, Isabel looked back at the brochure. The mountains. The place where she and Diego had once been truly happy when they first started dating. The irony of it all. You know, she said, looking at her friend, I think I'll take your offer. I really do need time to think. Elena hugged her. That's the right decision. Sometimes, you have to climb higher to see the right path. Isabel nodded, gazing at the photo of the snow-covered peaks. Something inside her whispered, this trip would change everything. She just didn't know yet how prophetic that feeling would be. Isabel packed her suitcase in half an hour. Amazing how little you actually need when your life is turning upside down. A few sweaters, jeans, thermal wear for the mountains, toiletries, everything fit into a medium-sized suitcase. At the entrance of the Panorama Business Center, she ran into Diego. He looked disheveled, eyes red, stubble on his face he usually shaved every morning. Isabel, we need to talk, he said, blocking her path to the taxi. I know I screwed up. Te juro, I'll explain everything. Isabel looked at her husband, trying to see the man she once climbed mountain slopes with. But before her stood a stranger, scared and insincere. I'm taking 2 weeks off, her voice was steadier than she expected. I need to think. Away from you. Isabel, listen, Diego stepped toward her, his face contorting in a mix of pain and awkwardness. What you saw, with Marina, it was a mistake. I got confused. But I only love you. How easy it is for him to speak of love now, Isabel thought. His words, once full of meaning, now sounded like lines from a bad soap opera. I don't want to talk about it right now. She walked past him toward the waiting taxi. 2 weeks, Diego. Don't call me. I'll reach out when I'm ready. He tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. And one more thing, if you really care, go visit my mother. She asked about you. On the plane, Isabel looked out the window at the clouds drifting below. It felt like she had left more than just Diego and his lies behind. She had left part of herself. The self who was a wife, a woman longing for a child. Who would she be in 2 weeks? And would she return to that old life at all? The airport greeted her with cool air and the hum of voices. Outside the terminal, buses with various hotel and resort logos lined up. A small group had gathered near the Las Sierras Azules bus, a middle-aged couple, a young woman with a large backpack, and 2 men who looked like mountaineers. Isabel took a window seat. The bus pulled out, winding its way up the mountain road. She used to feel thrilled by this journey into the mountains. Every turn revealed new views, every ascent brought her closer to the sky. But now she watched the towering trees with a strange sense of detachment. The road twisted between cliffs, rising and falling into valleys. At one bend, Isabel noticed fresh avalanche debris, a bare slope, broken trees, stones scattered along the roadside. Happened a week ago, the driver said, catching her gaze in the rearview mirror. No one was hurt, but it took 2 days to clear the road. Something in his voice made Isabel look at him more closely. He looked exhausted, sunken eyes, tense shoulders, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly. On sharp turns, the bus occasionally swerved into the oncoming lane, drawing uneasy looks from passengers. Isabel glanced down, where a mountain river crashed against the rocks below. The height made her dizzy. One wrong move, and the bus would plunge into the abyss. A bizarre thought flashed through her mind. Would anyone even look for me if I didn't come back? Diego would probably be relieved. She turned away from the window, but the anxiety wouldn't leave her. The bus swerved again, nearing a dangerous curve. From around the bend, a truck appeared, barreling down the center of the narrow road. Everything happened in seconds. The driver yanked the wheel, trying to avoid the crash. The screech of brakes. Passengers screaming. Isabel saw the guardrail buckle under the bus's weight. And then, weightlessness. Darkness. The all-consuming cold of the mountain river crashed over Isabel. She couldn't breathe, water filled her nose, mouth, lungs. Her world narrowed to a single instinct: survive. The river carried her, slamming her against rocks and branches. Each blow sent a jolt of pain through her, but her mind refused to shut down, clinging to life with everything it had. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but her fingers kept slipping from the slick stones. The raging current tossed her body like a rag doll. I'm dying, a detached thought drifted through her mind. Strangely, there was no fear, only regret. Regret that she never told her mother how much she loved her. That she'd never again see the mountaintops at sunrise. The last thing she remembered was strong arms pulling her from the icy grip of the river and a rough male voice. Hold on, you hear me? Just hold on. Waking was agony. Pain throbbed through every part of her body, but most intensely in her head and left leg. Isabel tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids wouldn't respond. Through a haze, she saw blurred outlines of wooden walls, firelight, someone's face leaning over her. She's awake, the voice was low and raspy. Don't try to move. Your leg's broken and you've got a serious concussion. Isabel tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp escaped her throat. Her lips were dry, her tongue uncooperative. Water, she finally managed to whisper. The man brought a mug to her lips. Warm liquid with a bitter herbal taste moistened her parched throat. Where am I? Every word was a struggle. You're safe, he replied. I'm Ramon. I found you by the river, about 2 kilometers from the crash site. Crash, the word cracked the fog around her mind. The bus. The truck. The fall. Other passengers, she asked, already sensing the answer from the grim expression on his face. Rescuers reached the bus. Ramon looked away. No survivors were found. They think you're dead too. You were thrown into the river and carried away. Isabel tried to absorb what she'd just heard, but the pain and shock clouded her thoughts. She was the only one who survived. By some impossible chance. Or maybe it was punishment, to live when others had died. I need to inform someone. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain tore through her body. Black spots danced before her eyes. Stay still, Ramon said firmly. You're badly injured. There's no signal here. The nearest village is 2 days away. You won't make it in your condition. Isabel didn't hear the last part. Her consciousness faded again into darkness. In that darkness swirled fragments of images: the falling bus, the icy water, Diego's face, her mother's smile, the mountains, looking down on human tragedy with silent indifference. The following days, or weeks, blurred into an endless cycle of nightmares and awakenings. Isabel drifted between feverish sleep and a reality thick with pain and fog. Sometimes, she thought she heard the voices of rescuers calling on the slope, but they didn't see her, swept away by the current. In moments of clarity, Ramon was always there, silent, focused, changing bandages, making her drink the bitter herbal brew. His hands, large and rough, were surprisingly gentle when tending her wounds or adjusting the homemade splint on her broken leg. "Are you a doctor?" she asked once, when her mind was clearer. "I used to be," he replied briefly. "Army medic." He said nothing more, and Isabel didn't have the strength to ask. In rare moments of wakefulness, she tried to gather the pieces of memory: who she was, what had happened, why she was here. But the memories slipped away like water through her fingers. Sometimes she woke up screaming, reliving the fall, the freezing water, the fight for air. In those moments, Ramon sat silently beside her, not offering empty comfort, just making it clear that she wasn't alone in this fight between life and death. True awakening came with a scent, the aroma of mountain herbs drying under the ceiling of the wooden cabin. The smell triggered something deep inside her, a childhood memory of a summer hike with her father, his campfire stories, the feeling of safety. She opened her eyes. Sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating a simple room with wooden walls. Beams carved with patterns lined the ceiling, bundles of herbs hung to dry, and rough handmade furniture stood around her. Embers glowed in the fireplace, giving off comforting warmth. Isabel tried to sit up and, to her surprise, managed it, though barely. The pain in her head had dulled, and the agony in her broken leg had softened to a dull ache. On a chair beside the bed sat Ramon, dozing in an awkward position. In the daylight, she could steady him properly for the first time, a man in his 50s, with a thick beard flecked with gray, deep wrinkles on his withered face, and a scar cutting across his left eyebrow. His hands, folded in his lap, were calloused, with old burn marks clearly visible. "How long have you been sitting there?" Isabel asked. Her voice made Ramon startle awake. "You're awake," he said, and for a moment something like relief crossed his face. "Really awake? How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a train," Isabel tried to smile. "But I think I'm going to live." She looked around. On the rough-hewn table lay her belongings, her watch, wallet, and phone, with a shattered screen. "That's all I managed to save," Ramon said, following her gaze. "The rest was taken by the river." "Thank you for saving me," Isabel said, realizing just how inadequate those words were. This stranger had pulled her from the river, cared for her, nursed her back to life. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." Ramon shrugged awkwardly. "I heard about the crash on the radio. Went to see if I could help. Found you on the riverbank, barely alive." "How long was I unconscious?" Isabel asked, trying to piece together the fragments of memory. Ramon hesitated, as if unsure whether to tell her. "Today makes 3 weeks since the accident." 3 weeks? Isabel felt her breath catch. "That can't be. I only remember bits and pieces." "You had a serious head injury," Ramon said slowly, choosing his words. "There were times I wasn't sure you'd make it. But you're strong. The first week you were out cold, then slowly started coming back." 3 weeks? Isabel repeated, stunned. "My mother, she thinks I'm dead. I have to tell someone." "There's no signal here," Ramon repeated. "The nearest settlement is 2 days away by mountain trails. With your leg, we won't be able to get there for another 3 weeks at least, not until it's fully healed." Isabel sank back into the pillow, trying to grasp the scale of it all. At least another month and a half before she could return home. And then 2 days on foot. No one knew she was alive. Diego had probably already mourned her, or more likely, found comfort in Marina's arms. And her mother. How had she taken the news of her daughter's death? "Where are we?" she asked, focusing on concrete things. "In the Cordillera del Viento Reserve," Ramon replied. "High in the Andes. I live here. Been here a long time." He stood and walked to the window. Isabel noticed for the first time the slight limp in his step. "Try standing, if you feel up to it," he said, still looking out. "You need to start moving your leg again." Isabel carefully sat up, then, leaning on a small table, stood. The broken leg, secured in a makeshift but well-crafted splint, ached, but not as badly as she had expected. She stood still for a few seconds, adjusting to the sensation of being upright, then took a tentative step. Ramon turned, watching her closely. Good. But don't overdo it the first few days. Leaning against the wall, Isabel walked to the window. The view beyond the glass took her breath away, mountain peaks dusted with snow, even in summer, steep slopes covered in pine forest, a canyon at the bottom of which a silver ribbon of river wound through the rocks. Beautiful, isn't it? Ramon's voice was gentler than usual. Live here long enough, and you start to understand, the mountains are alive. They have moods, their own character. Isabel looked at him, not with the fear she would have expected to feel in such a situation, but with growing curiosity. Who was this man? Why did he live alone in the mountains? What had driven a military medic to become a recluse? In his eyes, she didn't see danger, but a deep, lingering sadness. A kind of sorrow that he wore like others wear clothing, an ever-present part of his daily life. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. You saved my life. Ramon shook his head. You saved it yourself. I only helped. A silence settled between them. Not awkward, but charged, full of unspoken thoughts and questions. Two people brought together by fate under the most unlikely circumstances. One had lost the past, the other, her possible future. And both had ended up here, high in the mountains, far from a world that seemed to have already forgotten them. Isabel's first independent step across the room was a small triumph. Pain shot through her knee with every movement, but her stubbornness was stronger. Ramon watched without a word, but something like approval flickered in his eyes when she reached the window, leaning on a handmade crutch. Today the window, tomorrow around the cabin, Isabel said, catching her breath. Don't rush, Ramon replied as he checked her bandage. The mountains teach patience. Day by day, step by step, Isabel returned to life. Her muscles regained strength, her wounds healed, even the nightmares came less often. The first time she managed to step out onto the porch, the world beyond the cabin revealed itself in all its grandeur, snow-kissed peaks, endless sky, eagles soaring over the canyon. Up here, at bird's-eye height, her former life felt distant and unreal, like a dream. Gradually, she began helping with the daily chores, peeling vegetables, sorting herbs, even learning to keep the fire alive in the hearth. Her interactions with Ramon were built on quiet practicality. He showed her, she did it. And yet, behind that simplicity lay something deeper, a slow-growing trust, wordless and genuine. Each evening, sitting by the fire, they began to learn a little more about each other. At first, their conversations were purely practical, where the supplies were kept, how to read the weather by the clouds, which herbs helped with colds. But one night, something changed. Why are you here? Isabel asked, watching Ramon methodically sharpen a hunting knife. Why do you live alone, so far from people? Ramon looked up from his work. In the firelight, his face appeared carved from stone, but his eyes lived a life of their own, reflecting a pain he had long learned to carry in silence. I was a military medic, he began, as if deciding to step over an invisible line. I worked in conflict zones. I saw people kill each other in the name of ideas that weren't worth a single drop of blood. I healed, I saved, I lost, that was my job. He fell silent, and Isabel didn't press him. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. I had a family, he continued after a pause. A wife, Anna. A daughter, Mariana. They waited for me after every deployment. And then... His voice faltered. During one of my assignments, there was a terrorist attack in our city. A shopping mall. They just went out to pick up a few things. Isabel instinctively reached out and touched his wrist, a gesture of support, of human solidarity in the face of unspeakable pain. I couldn't save them, he finished in a hoarse whisper. I, a medic who saved strangers on the battlefield, couldn't save my own family. And later, it came out that the attack could have been prevented. There were warnings. There were signs. The betrayal of a system I gave 20 years of my life to. That night, they talked until sunrise. Ramon's pain struck a chord in Isabel, different in scale, but similar in essence. Betrayal. Loss. The inability to change the past. A week later, Isabel attempted to escape. She waited until Ramon went out to hunt, packed what few belongings she had, took some food, and headed for a barely visible trail that led down the mountain. I have to let my mother know I'm alive, she told herself, though deep down, she knew that wasn't the whole truth. Something else was driving her, the fear of how deeply she was beginning to care for this place, for this man. The fear of losing the version of herself she once knew. She'd barely made it 2 kilometers before the snowstorm hit. Sudden and brutal, as only mountain storms can be, it descended in a white wall, erasing the trail, landmarks, even her sense of direction. Isabel tried to turn back but could no longer tell where the cabin was. The wind howled, sharp snow stung her face, the cold seeped into her bones. I'm going to die, she realized with piercing clarity. Die without telling my mother I'm alive. Die without making sense of what had happened to her. Without ever properly thanking the man who had saved her, twice. When Ramon's strong arms lifted her from the snowy trap, Isabel had nearly lost consciousness from the cold. He carried her through the blizzard, holding her to his chest like a child, muttering something, maybe swearing, maybe praying. Back at the cabin, as he rubbed her frostbitten hands near the fire, he grew truly angry for the first time. You understand you could have died? His voice trembled with restrained fury. Por qué? To prove I could do it on my own. I need to tell my mother I'm alive, Isabel repeated stubbornly. And for that, you'd risk never seeing her again, he shook his head. You can't outrun fate. Not in the mountains. They looked at each other, 2 people who had lost and found something essential on top of the world. In that moment, a deeper understanding formed between them, not just a knowledge of each other's stories, but a profound recognition of each other's truth. I'm afraid, Isabel whispered. Afraid that when I return, nothing will be the same. That I won't be the same. You're not supposed to be, Ramon answered quietly. The mountains change everyone who comes to them. They strip away what's unnecessary and leave only the core. At the end of December, Ramon fell ill with a severe fever. A cold caught during the hunt turned into pneumonia. Now it was Isabel caring for him, brewing herbal teas, placing cool cloths on his forehead, making sure the fire didn't go out. In his fevered delirium, Ramon called out for his wife and daughter, begging for forgiveness for not being there when they needed him. Isabel held his hand, just as he had once held hers when she hovered on the edge of life and death. Anna, he murmured, lost in the fog of illness, forgive me. I should have been there. Only then did Isabel fully grasp the depth of his loneliness and grief. This strong, silent man bore a wound that had never truly healed. And yet, he had found the strength to save her, care for her, give her a second chance. When the fever finally broke and Ramon began to recover, something shifted between them. Their bond took on a new shape, no longer just 2 strangers brought together by fate, but people who had shared fear, pain, and hope. People who had seen each other in their most vulnerable moments and had not turned away. Meanwhile, in the city, a police officer looked at Diego with sympathy and said, The bodies of all the passengers haven't been recovered yet, but the chances are nearly zero. Diego sat in the police station, where he'd been called for the official notification of the accident, struggling to process what he'd just heard. Isabel was gone. The bus had plunged off the cliff. All passengers were presumed dead. His first feeling was shock, deafening, paralyzing. Then came a strange, almost inappropriate thought, now I don't have to choose between her and Marina. And immediately after, a wave of shame for having thought it. Do you need to call anyone? The officer asked. Any relatives of the deceased? Her mother, Diego replied, as if snapping out of a daze. She needs to be informed. He imagined how the news would hit Maria, a fragile elderly woman with a heart condition, for whom Isabel had been the only close family. And then, a plan began to take shape in Diego's mind. Maria's apartment in the historic district of La Ribera, 3 rooms, high ceilings, a view of the river, was the last thing still connecting him to his old life. If it passed to him. When Maria opened the door, Diego was struck by how much she had aged in the past month. She looked gaunt, new wrinkles had etched themselves into her face, her eyes had lost their sparkle. Dieguito, she hugged him. How are you? Any news from Isabel? He lowered his eyes, feigning grief. Maria, please sit down. I have bad news. She went pale before he even spoke the dreadful words. A mother's heart already knew. A tourist bus, Diego began, carefully choosing his words, went off a cliff. The rescuers say, there's no hope. Maria didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just froze, as if all life had drained from her in an instant. Only her fingers, clutching the edge of her sweater, turned white from tension. It's a mistake, she whispered. I would have felt it, if my girl. Diego sat beside her and took her hands in his. I'm so sorry. I can't believe it myself. In the following days, he stayed close, bringing groceries, cooking meals, calling the doctor when she fell ill. Maria was in a state of shock, only emerging from it to ask if there was any news about her daughter. In the 3rd week, Diego brought up paperwork. Maria, we need to process Isabel's insurance. For that, we'll need your signature, as her closest relative. She nodded absently, not really absorbing the details. Her thoughts were far away, with the daughter she refused to believe was truly gone. And one more thing, Diego added, making his voice sound as caring as possible. Isabel had some distant relatives on her father's side. They could try to claim the property. To protect you, it would be best to sign the apartment over. Maria looked at him, puzzled. Why? So no one can take your home from you, Diego explained patiently. I'll take care of all the paperwork. You just need to sign. A flicker of doubt passed through her eyes, the last spark of clarity protesting against deceit. But grief clouded her judgment, and she nodded. All right, Diego. You've always been so thoughtful. The next day, Diego brought a notary directly to Maria's apartment. The elderly woman signed all the documents mechanically, without even reading them. Diego exhaled quietly, the first step was done. That same evening, Maria's health took a turn. The left side of her face went numb, her arm drooped, her speech became slurred. Stroke, the hospital diagnosed. Diego played the role of the devastated son-in-law while the doctors fought for her life. It's for the best, a treacherous thought flickered through his mind, one that even startled him. But not enough to change his plans. To us. Marina raised her champagne glass, flashing a bright white smile. To our new life in the capital. They were sitting in a restaurant overlooking the city at night. Diego looked tired, but satisfied. The plan had worked, the deed was signed, Maria's apartment was now his. How's the old lady? Marina asked casually, sipping her champagne. Still in the hospital? She's being discharged next week, Diego grimaced. I'll have to figure something out. She can't live alone anymore after the stroke. And what do you suggest? Marina's voice held a trace of annoyance. Hire a caregiver? That's expensive and a hassle. Diego swirled the glass in his hands. I looked into a care home, Aguas Tranquilas in the village of Pinars. They specialize in post-stroke rehabilitation. Perfect. Marina beamed. We settle the old lady there, sell the apartment, and off we go, to our new life. Diego nodded, trying not to think about how the old woman used to bake him pies and proudly speak of his achievements as if he were her own son. The glass in his hand trembled slightly, and a few drops of champagne spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. A care facility? Maria repeated, struggling with her words. Her speech remained slurred after the stroke. I don't want a care facility. I want to go home. It's not just any care facility, it's a specialized rehabilitation center, Diego explained patiently, helping her pack. You'll get round-the-clock care there. And in the meantime, I'll be working on the apartment so everything's perfect by the time you come back." She shook her head doubtfully but didn't argue. She no longer had the strength. The Aguas Tranquilas care home looked respectable from the outside, a 3-story building among pine trees, well-kept grounds, a friendly receptionist. Diego filled out all the paperwork, kissed Maria on the cheek, and promised to visit every week, a promise he had no intention of keeping. Already in the taxi on the way back, he called the realtor Marina had recommended. "Senora Tamara? Good afternoon. About the apartment in La Ribera, we're ready to move forward." Maria realized the horror of her situation on the 3rd day at Aguas Tranquilas. Once the sedatives, generously administered in the first days, wore off, she saw the reality of the facility, peeling walls behind a respectable facade, indifferent staff, meager meals, and overcrowded rooms. This was not a rehabilitation center, but essentially a cheap nursing home for those their families wanted to forget. "I'd like to call my son-in-law," she told a nurse, a young woman with a tired face. "Calls are only allowed on weekends," the nurse snapped. "No more than 5 minutes." "But it's urgent." "Everything's urgent for someone," the nurse shrugged indifferently. "Those are the rules." On the weekend, Maria couldn't reach Diego, his phone was out of range. The next weekend was the same. And the next. Gradually, the awful truth sank in, she'd been deceived. Diego hadn't arranged the deed to protect her, but to take ownership of the apartment. He had placed her in this dreadful facility and forgotten her. At night, she cried quietly, thinking of her daughter. Maybe Isabel truly had died. Or maybe she'd found the strength to start a new life, realizing what kind of man her husband truly was. Maria clung to that thought, finding strange comfort in it. "Goodbye, small-town life," Marina declared enthusiastically as she slammed shut the door of the car loaded with their belongings. "Hello, capital city." Diego cast one last glance at the city he was leaving forever. A strange mix of relief and vague unease stirred inside him. The apartment had sold for a good price, their things were packed, and their tickets to a new life had been purchased. "Let's go," he started the engine. "The big city awaits." Marina turned the music up full blast and laughed, joyful, confident about their future. She didn't know Diego hadn't told her the whole truth. That his relationship with the company leadership had soured after Isabel's death, especially when it came to light that his affair with Marina had begun long before the tragedy, and many blamed him, at least in part, for what happened. That the promised promotion at the main office was no longer as certain as he claimed. That the money from the apartment sale was their only safety net if things went wrong. But for now, he pushed those thoughts away. Ahead was the capital, new opportunities, a new life. Without Isabel. Without the past. Without regrets. Or so he told himself. Spring came to the mountains suddenly, as everything does in those places. Just yesterday the snow crunched underfoot, and today the first streams were trickling, and on the southern slopes timid flowers had appeared, tiny stars amid the melting snow. Ramon stood on the threshold of the cabin, watching Isabel hang freshly washed herbal pouches on a makeshift clothesline. Her movements were steady now, no longer marked by the hesitant caution of the injured. Her broken leg had fully healed, leaving only a faint limp by evening. Her hair, grown long over the winter, was tied in a simple ponytail, revealing a sun-kissed, stronger face, with new smile lines at the corners of her eyes. She's ready to leave, Ramon thought, and the realization brought a dull ache inside. Isabel had recovered not only physically, but emotionally. She no longer woke up screaming from nightmares, didn't flinch at sudden noises, didn't stare hopelessly at the horizon the way people do when they've lost everything. "What are you thinking about?" Isabel noticed his gaze and smiled. "About spring," he lied. "That soon the mountain passes will be clear again." He didn't say what he meant, and you'll be able to go. But she heard it anyway, understood it from his eyes. That evening, as they ate by the fire, Ramon finally spoke. "I think in about a week, we can head down into the valley. If you still want to return." Isabel looked at him for a long moment. "You know what I want?" "My mother," She's believed I was dead for nearly a year. And I need to face what happened to the life I left behind. Ramon nodded, staring into the fire. He understood. After all, he had once made the same choice, to leave a world that had brought him nothing but pain. She had the right to make hers. You've changed a lot during this time, he said quietly. You've become real. Like you used to wear a mask, and now you don't need it anymore. The mountains don't tolerate pretense, Isabel smiled, repeating the words he had once told her. And you? Have you never thought of going back? Ramon shook his head. Why? There's no one waiting for me there. And here? She asked softly. Is there someone waiting for you here? Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of firewood in the hearth. Then Isabel stood, walked over to him, and placed a hand on his shoulder. You didn't save me just so I'd stay in a cage, even a golden one. And you can save yourself too. He didn't answer, but something flickered in his eyes. A subtle shift, as if a door long locked had opened just a crack. The descent from the mountains took 4 days. They followed paths only Ramon knew, narrow ledges above cliffs, hidden passages through rock, fords across swift mountain streams. Every step down was a farewell, to the silent peaks, to the pure mountain air, to the simplicity of a life where only the essential mattered. And every step was also a return, to the world of people, to responsibilities and complications, to a past that still needed closure. This is where cell service begins, Ramon said at the end of the 4th day, as they reached a broad plateau covered with young grass. Another hour, and we'll be in Vallehermoso. There's a police station there, they'll help you contact your city. Isabel nodded, suddenly overcome with an odd anxiety. The familiar world she had longed for all winter now seemed strange and threatening. How would it receive her? What would she say to her mother? And what if she found out Diego hadn't even warned her? You're afraid? Ramon asked quietly, reading her emotions with ease. Yes, she admitted honestly. I'm not the same woman who got on that bus a year ago. How do I live now? The same way you survived here, he replied simply. Day by day. Step by step. They stopped at the edge of the forest, where the village nestled at the foot of the mountains came into view. Ordinary houses, roads, electric poles, all the things that had once seemed like the only possible reality, now looked strange, almost unreal after life in the mountains. I won't go any further, Ramon said, and from his tone, Isabel understood the decision was final. She turned to him, the man who had pulled her from the river, nursed her back to life, taught her how to live again. The man who had become closer to her than most people who'd called themselves her friends down below. Thank you, she said, and in those simple words was everything she wanted to express. Ramon nodded, his face unreadable, though something like pain flashed in his eyes. Take care of yourself, he said, and Isabel knew it was a goodbye. She stepped toward him and hugged him tightly, breathing in his familiar scent, campfire smoke, pine, bitter herbal brew. Then she stepped back and, without looking behind, walked down toward the village. She turned only once, when she reached the first houses. Ramon was still standing there, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the mountains that had once sheltered him from the pain of the world. Isabel raised a hand in a farewell gesture, not knowing if he saw it, and moved on, unaware that this moment wasn't an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter for them both. The police station in Vallehermoso was a single-story building with a faded flag above the entrance. Inside, it smelled of old paper and tobacco. I need help, Isabel said to the duty officer, a young sergeant who looked up from his logbook in surprise. My name is Isabel Moreno. I survived the crash of the tourist bus that went over the cliff a year ago on the way to Las Sierras Azules. The sergeant stared at her in stunned silence, as if a ghost had appeared in front of him. The accident on the Eastern Andes Serpentine Road, he finally said. But no one survived that. I was thrown into the river, Isabel interrupted. The current carried me kilometers away from the crash site. A local man found me and nursed me back to health. I was severely injured, I couldn't move for many months. What followed were hours of explanations, phone calls, and paperwork. Officer Pablo Esteban, an older man with eyes that had seen too much, treated her with unexpected understanding. He arranged a medical exam, helped draft official statements, and contacted the police in her hometown. An incredible story, he said, looking at Isabel over his glasses. We don't often get to deliver good news. Usually, it's the opposite. Isabel sat in his office, holding a cup of strong coffee, trying to gather her thoughts. Reality was closing in too fast: bureaucratic procedures, the need to prove her identity, to explain her disappearance. Can I call my mother? She asked. Pablo Esteban nodded and slid the phone toward her. Isabel dialed the familiar number, but only long beeps followed. No answer. Maybe she's at the country house? She told herself, though unease was already creeping in. Let me check the database, the officer offered and began typing on the computer. Suarez Maria. At that address the listed property owner is Moreno Diego Andres. Since April of last year. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. That can't be. That's my mother's apartment. Diego, my husband, he wouldn't. But he could. The memory of their last conversation, his insincere remorse, the phone he always kept out of sight, all came rushing back with new force. Of course he had taken advantage of her death. Of course he had claimed what was never his. I need to get back to the city, Isabel said firmly. Immediately. Returning to her hometown felt surreal. The same streets, the same buildings, the same faces of passers-by, but Isabel saw them with new eyes, the eyes of someone who had been to the other side of life as she knew it. In the pocket of her jeans was a statement from the Vallehermoso police station, the only document proving her identity. No phone, no money, no keys to the apartment that, as she had just learned, no longer belonged to her. Her first stop was Elena's. Instinct told her that her childhood friend was the one person who wouldn't betray or abandon her. Elena opened the door and froze on the threshold, unable to believe her eyes. Isabel. Oh my God. But how? They stood embraced in the middle of the spacious living room as Elena wept without shame. I knew it, I felt it. You couldn't have just left without saying goodbye. She helped Isabel with the first necessary steps, lent her money, gave her an old phone, helped arrange temporary ID documents. She accompanied her to the police station, where Isabel was questioned for hours as officers verified details about the crash and her survival. Diego said you died, Elena told her over coffee in her kitchen. He looked devastated. He said he couldn't stay in the city where everything reminded him of you. Maria was in terrible shape. I wanted to visit her, but Diego always found an excuse why it wasn't the right time. And then, they just vanished. Both of them. I need to find out what happened to my mother, Isabel said, gripping the coffee cup until her fingers turned white. I'll go to La Ribera tomorrow. Their former neighbor, Nina Vasquez, gasped when she saw Isabel. Sweetheart. You're alive. But they told us. What happened to my mother? Where is she? Isabel interrupted, her heart pounding. Nina lowered her eyes. They took her away. After her stroke. Diego said it was a good rehabilitation facility. But he never left an address. Then he disappeared too. The apartment's been sold, the new owners are moving in next week. Sold? Isabel felt the ground shift beneath her feet. How? That was my mother's apartment. Nina shrugged. I don't know the details. I only visited Maria a couple of times in the hospital after the stroke. She always asked about you, poor thing. She never believed that you were, well. A vision flashed in Isabel's mind, her mother, having lost her daughter, helpless after a stroke, left in the care of a man who betrayed them both. Do you remember the name of the facility where they took her? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Aguas Tranquilas, I think, Nina said uncertainly. Somewhere in Pinars. Diego said the staff were excellent. The police took the search for Maria seriously. The story of a woman thought dead returning to discover her mother may have been a victim of fraud caused a stir, especially when it emerged that Aguas Tranquilas had a history of violations and was already under investigation. We found transportation records for Maria Suarez. She was transferred by medical van, the investigator informed her. He was a young but graying man with a sharp gaze. The address matches Aguas Tranquilas Care Home, Village of Pinars. We're heading there tomorrow morning. I'm going with you, Isabel said, not a request, but a statement. The investigator met her gaze and simply nodded. From the outside, Aguas Tranquilas looked respectable. But the moment they stepped inside, the illusion crumbled. The stale smell of old food and medicine, peeling walls, dim hallways. Lieutenant Gonzalez, the police officer, introduced himself to the administrator, a young woman with frightened eyes. We need to see resident Maria Suarez. I'm afraid it's rest hour right now. She began, but trailed off under the investigator's unblinking stare. All right, I'll check the roster. Isabel stood there, her fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her skin. She could feel the despair hanging in the air, embedded in the hunched figures of the elderly in the lounge and the indifferent eyes of the staff. Third floor, room 314, the administrator finally said. But I have to warn you. Isabel didn't wait to hear the rest. A crushing sense of urgency pushed her forward. Something deeper than instinct told her that every minute counted. Room 314 was a small space with 4 beds, 3 nightstands, and a single window looking out at a blank wall of the adjacent building. The air was heavy with the scent of medicine and soiled linens. Maria lay on the bed by the far wall, emaciated, her features gaunt, her eyes dull and fixed on the ceiling. She looked decades older, as though she had lived an entire lifetime in the span of a year. Mama, Isabel whispered, dropping to her knees by the bed. Maria slowly turned her head. For a few seconds, she stared at her daughter's face with an unfocused gaze. Then her eyes widened, and her lips began to tremble. Isabelita? My girl? Is it really you? Yes, Mama, it's me. Isabel took her hand, so light, almost weightless. I'm alive. I came back for you. Maria pushed herself up on the bed, reached trembling hands toward her daughter's face, as if unable to believe her eyes. My God. I knew it. I knew you were alive. I prayed every day. They told me you died, but a mother's heart knows the truth. They embraced, 2 people who had lost each other and found one another again against all odds. Isabel could feel her mother's heart beating, fast but strong, like a bird ready to break free from its cage. I'm taking you out of here, she said firmly. Right now. Everything happened fast after that, a confrontation with the care home administration, a call for additional police support when it was discovered that many residents lacked proper medical documentation. An ambulance for Maria, who, despite the emotional uplift from seeing her daughter, was in critical condition, malnourished, with bed sores, and signs of kidney failure due to improper treatment. In the admissions wing of the city hospital, Isabel held her mother's hand while doctors examined her. How did you survive? Maria asked quietly when they were briefly alone. Tell me everything. Isabel began her story. About the crash, the river, the man who found her and nursed her back to life in the mountains. A story that sounded unbelievable, even to her, but every word of it was true. This Ramon, Maria gave a faint smile. He's a good man. I wish I could thank him. I hope you'll have that chance, Isabel squeezed her hand. But for now, rest. Gather your strength. We have a long road ahead. When her mother finally fell asleep, Isabel stepped out into the hallway. The investigator was waiting for her, reviewing paperwork. How is she? He asked, looking up. The doctors say with proper care, she'll recover. Isabel leaned against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. What happens now? We've issued a warrant for your husband, the investigator replied. Fraud, document forgery, abandonment of a dependent person, there's no shortage of charges. And he paused. We've started the process of invalidating the property transfer. Given your mother's condition at the time and the evidence of deception, we have strong grounds to reclaim the apartment. Isabel nodded. An hour ago, that would have seemed like the most important thing in the world. But now, only one thing mattered: her mother was alive, and they were together again. Thank you, she said sincerely, for everything you're doing. The investigator smiled. Just doing my job. You know, in this line of work, happy endings are rare. We usually see the darkest parts of life. But sometimes there are miracles. Isabel walked over to the window. The spring sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. Somewhere far away in the mountains, Ramon was probably lighting his evening fire. I wonder if he's thinking of me, she thought. Does he know he saved not just my life, but my mother's too? I'll find a way to thank you, she promised silently. Then aloud, with quiet determination growing inside her, she said, I'm going to fight for justice. And Diego would answer for everything he'd done. The 4 months that separated Isabel from her return from mountain captivity flew by in a blur of paperwork, offices, and official stamps. The world of bureaucracy proved no less treacherous than the snow-covered passes of the Cordillera del Viento. Replacing lost documents, proving her identity, undergoing medical evaluations, every step demanded strength and patience. But the real battle still lay ahead. Despite the police warrant, Diego had vanished without a trace. And without bringing him to justice, the matter of the apartment remained in legal limbo. Isabel started working remotely for the advertising agency Creativa. The modest salary of a junior copywriter was just enough to cover a rented room and medicine for her mother. Maria was slowly recovering in a small apartment that Elena had helped them find. Every little victory, a button fastened by herself, a cup of coffee brewed without assistance, brought hope for a return to normal life. It was at Creativa's office, where Isabel had come to discuss a new project, that a fateful encounter occurred. That day was overcast, with low clouds hanging over the city, threatening to burst into rain. Isabel was hurrying down the corridor, flipping through her meeting notes, when she collided with a man in a sharp dark gray suit who had just exited a conference room. Excuse me, she began, looking up. My fault, the stranger replied. His voice was deep and well-modulated, the kind of voice that probably carried weight in courtrooms. I wasn't watching where I was going. He was tall, with a neatly trimmed dark beard and a touch of gray at his temples. His expensive watch, flawless suit, and confident posture marked him as a successful man used to a certain status. But his eyes, as gray, attentive, with a warm spark beneath the surface, didn't match the cold professional image. You're the new copywriter, right? He asked, holding her gaze a moment longer than politeness required. Isabel Moreno, if I'm not mistaken? Yes. And you are? Arturo Sanchez, he said, extending a hand. I handle the agency's legal affairs. His handshake was firm but not overbearing, just enough to convey confidence without pressure. You know, he said suddenly, I've heard your story. I hope this doesn't sound intrusive, but everyone in the office is talking about the woman who came back from the dead, Isabel said with a dry smile. More like admiring your strength of will, Arturo replied seriously. Not everyone could survive in the mountains and then rebuild their life from scratch. There was no idle curiosity in his gaze, only genuine empathy. Isabel surprised herself by saying, Actually, I do need some legal advice. If you have time. Arturo checked his watch. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. But I'm free tomorrow after 6. That was how their professional relationship began. The next evening, Isabel sat in Arturo's office at the small but respectable law firm Sanchez and Partners, located in the city's historic center. Your case is complicated, Arturo said, flipping through the documents she'd brought, but promising. The medical reports on your mother's condition at the time she signed over the apartment, witness testimonies from neighbors saying she was in severe psychological distress after your death. These are all strong grounds to have the deed annulled. But Diego still hasn't been found, Isabel shook her head. The court can proceed without him, Arturo noted something in his notepad. What matters most is proving he took advantage of Maria's condition and misled her. He looked up from the documents, and Isabel noticed a change in his tone as he added, "You know, there are cases you take for a paycheck. And there are cases you take for justice. Yours is the latter." That evening, they spoke not only about legal matters. Arturo asked about her time in the mountains, about the man who saved her, about how she dealt with knowing the world believed her dead for a year. "You're an extraordinary woman, Isabel," he said at the end of the meeting. "After everything you've been through, most people would have broken. But you're fighting, not just for yourself, but for your mother." "I had a good teacher," she replied quietly, remembering Ramon and his lessons in survival. "He used to say, the mountains don't tolerate weakness, but they respect persistence." The following week, Arturo insisted on personally visiting Maria at home. The elderly woman was still struggling with mobility. He brought documents for her to sign, and a thermos of herbal tea. "My grandmother always said mint calms the nerves," he smiled. With remarkable patience, he explained every legal term. Watching how carefully and gently he helped Maria place her weak, post-stroke signature, Isabel found herself feeling something she hadn't known in a long time, something besides bitterness and fatigue. A feeling of warmth, like the kind she'd felt sitting by the fire in a mountain hut, a feeling of safety and hope. The news that Diego had returned to the city came unexpectedly. The realtor who had handled the sale of Maria's apartment called the lead investigator on the case. It turned out that the buyers had questions about the documents, and Diego had come back to sort things out. "He's in town with a woman," the investigator told Isabel. "Presumably Marina 3, the one you mentioned in your statement." "Where are they staying?" was all Isabel asked. "The Central Hotel." "But I wouldn't recommend you." He didn't finish. She had already hung up. Inside, she was boiling, not with blinding rage, but with cold resolve. She wanted to see his face when he realized his plan had failed. The Central Hotel was in an upscale part of the city. Isabel stepped into the spacious lobby, thinking through her next move. Luck was on her side. Diego and Marina were descending the staircase, heading for the exit. They were dressed expensively and fashionably. A new bracelet gleamed on Marina's wrist, the one she'd long dreamed of. When Diego saw Isabel, he froze as if he'd seen a ghost. His face went pale, his eyes widened. "Unpleasant surprise?" Isabel asked as she approached. It all felt strangely dreamlike. "Didn't expect to see the wife you buried? What is this circus?" Marina cut in, recovering quickly from the initial shock. "Didn't anyone teach you that showing up in public after your own funeral is bad manners?" Diego finally found his voice. "Isabel? But how? They said everyone had died." "Not everyone," she replied simply. "And now you'll have to answer for what you've done." "What did I do?" His confusion quickly turned to defensive aggression. "I took care of your mother when she was left alone. Arranged her care, got her into a facility. Aguas Tranquilas isn't a care facility, it's a hellhole where you dumped a sick woman to get your hands on her apartment." Isabel's voice trembled, but she kept it steady. "You used her grief and illness. You used my disappearance for your own gain. Don't you dare accuse me." Diego raised his voice, drawing glances from other guests. "You abandoned me, ran off into the mountains. I got the apartment through a deed, it's all legal." "Which you tricked a stroke victim into signing." Isabel shook her head. "The police are already looking for you. The case is going to the prosecutor's office." "What do you mean she ran off into the mountains?" Marina asked suddenly, glaring at Diego. "You said she died in an accident." "Shut up," Diego snapped without looking at her. "It's all lies. Maria and I filed everything legally. She signed willingly." "See you in court," Isabel said calmly. "And by the way, Diego, I didn't run off. I survived the accident. I fought for my life every day while you were taking the last thing my mother had." She turned to leave, but Diego grabbed her arm. "You won't prove anything. It's the word of a mentally unstable woman against official documents." "Let go of her," came a firm voice behind them. Arturo Sanchez stood at the hotel entrance. "Right now, or assault will be added to the charges." "And who's this?" Diego looked Arturo up and down. "Your new lover?" "Her attorney," Arturo said, stepping closer. He didn't raise his voice, but the steel in his gaze made Diego instinctively back off. "I strongly advise you to cease contact with my client and speak with your own lawyer. You're going to need a good one." Marina tugged on Diego's sleeve. "Come on, we still have another meeting." "This isn't over," Diego said to Isabel. "The apartment's legally mine, and I'll prove it." When they left, Isabel exhaled, only now realizing how tightly she'd been clenching her jaw. "Were you following me?" she asked Arturo. "Let's say I had a feeling you'd do exactly this," he replied with a slight smile. "If I were you, I'd want to look into the eyes of the man who betrayed me too." "And now?" "Now," Arturo offered her his hand, "we prepare for court. And I promise you, justice will be served." The preparations for the trial took a month and a half. Isabel and Arturo spent more and more time together, first discussing legal strategy and gathering evidence, and then, increasingly, simply talking. About life, about dreams, about passing thoughts. Between professional conversations, personal tones crept in, glances lingered a little longer than necessary, and casual touches stirred warmth. Arturo made no effort to hide his admiration for Isabel's inner strength. And she, in turn, deeply appreciated his professionalism combined with a sincere desire to help. Their closeness grew gradually, almost imperceptibly. "Tomorrow's the first hearing," Arturo said one evening as they finished reviewing the documents in his office. "Are you ready?" "You know," Isabel said thoughtfully, looking out at the evening city, after hanging on the edge of a cliff, clinging to slippery rocks, "a court hearing doesn't seem all that scary." Arturo smiled, but quickly grew serious. "Be prepared, Diego's lawyer will try to discredit you. Hints at mental instability, questions about where you were all year. They might even claim you faked your disappearance." "Let them try," Isabel met his gaze. "The truth is on my side, and I have you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she blushed. Arturo gently took her hand. "Yes. You have me. And not just as your lawyer." The Regional Court of Justice was packed. The sensational case of a woman returned from the dead, fighting for her inheritance, had drawn not only legal experts but journalists as well. Diego sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with his attorney, a well-known local specialist in property disputes. Marina was not beside him. Isabel later learned that she had returned to the capital, choosing to distance herself from the scandal. The testimony from the doctors who treated Maria after her stroke was a turning point. The patient was in a state of acute psychological trauma following the news of her daughter's death, testified a silver-haired neurologist. Combined with the effects of the stroke, disorientation, impaired judgment, I categorically state that she was not capable of making informed decisions about property during that time. Especially moving was the testimony of neighbor Nina Vasquez. After she was told Isabelita had died, Maria just faded before our eyes. Diego used to visit her often at first, then less and less. One day, I dropped in to check on her. She was crying, saying her son-in-law was pressuring her to sign some paper to protect the apartment from distant relatives. But what relatives? She had no one except her daughter. Diego's lawyer tried to shift the focus onto Isabel. "We can't rule out the possibility that the plaintiff deliberately hid for a year, planning to later contest a legal agreement. The tale of her miraculous rescue in the mountains by a hermit, who didn't even appear in court, raises serious doubts." Those words hit Isabel hard. She knew Ramon would never come to court, never leave the mountains for this noisy, chaotic world. And the lack of hard proof of her year in isolation really could undermine the case. Sensing her anxiety, Arturo subtly slipped her a folded note. Opening it, Isabel read, "They can question where you've been, but they can't question who you are." Those simple words gave her strength. When it was her turn to testify, Isabel spoke calmly and clearly, never once breaking eye contact with the judge. I miraculously survived the crash. The man who saved me chose to remain in the mountains. That is his choice and his right. But the fact remains, while I was fighting for my life, my husband took advantage of the situation to trick my mother out of her apartment and abandon her in a terrible private facility. When the judge withdrew to deliberate, Arturo squeezed Isabel's hand gently. No matter what happens, you've already won. You came back, saved your mother, and found the strength to fight. The ruling was clear. The deed was declared null and void, as it had been signed by someone legally incapacitated and under pressure. Diego was ordered to pay damages, both emotional and material, and cover Maria's treatment in a private clinic. When the judge read the decision, Isabel felt no triumph, only quiet relief, as if a heavy pack she had carried up a mountain pass had finally been lifted. The first step toward healing had been taken. As she exited the courtroom, she noticed that Marina had come after all, sitting in the very back row. The expression on her face as she looked at the defeated Diego was cold and calculating. In that moment, Isabel realized Diego's world wasn't crumbling just because of the court ruling, but because the illusion of love he had chosen over family had shattered too. Arturo gently touched her elbow. "Maria's waiting for the news." Isabel nodded. A new life lay ahead, difficult, uncharted, but real, like a mountain trail where every bend could lead to danger or to a breathtaking view. And now she knew she was ready for that journey. Diego stood by the window of his rented apartment, gripping a letter from Marina. "You're no longer of interest to me," she had written. "No money, no career, nothing. Don't try to find me." Isabel saw him outside a supermarket, nervous, wearing a worn-out jacket. Something compelled her to approach. "You came to gloat?" he asked hoarsely. "No," she replied calmly. "The Aguas Tranquilas facility is being reformed. They need staff, administrators, maintenance workers. You're offering me a job? After everything?" "Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom in order to push off," Isabel said, words once spoken to her by Ramon. "Revenge doesn't heal, Diego. And I want to build, not destroy." As she turned to leave, he called after her quietly. "Tell Maria that I'm sorry. Truly." There was sincerity in his voice for the first time. Isabel nodded, not knowing whether Diego would take the chance she'd offered, but knowing she had extended it not out of pity, but understanding. Maria slowly recovered. Each small victory, buttoning a shirt, making her own tea, was celebrated like a holiday. Isabel found remote work writing for tourism campaigns. In the evenings, she often took out the only photo that had survived, a blurred snapshot of mountains with Ramon's silhouette barely visible. 6 months after the trial, everything had changed. Her relationship with Arturo had grown steadily, with the kind of care only known to those who had learned the price of rash choices. To Isabel's surprise, Arturo turned out to be an avid mountain hiker. "Mountains teach honesty," he once said. "There's no room for pretense up there." "I know," she answered softly. That night, Isabel told him everything about the life she'd lived in the mountains, the daily struggle, and Ramon's quiet wisdom. Then, the morning sickness caught her off guard. At 8 weeks pregnant, Dr. Luz examined her test results with surprise. "But you were diagnosed with tubal blockage," the doctor said. "We discussed IVF, remember?" Apparently, the diagnosis was wrong. Isabel smiled. When she told Arturo, his reaction was unexpected. "That's impossible. I can't have children." He told her about the diagnosis from 3 years ago, how his ex-wife, Natalia, had left him afterward. But everything changed with a sudden phone call from Arturo's mother. At her apartment, the truth came out. The real test results showed Arturo was perfectly healthy. Natalia arranged with the doctor to falsify the results, Carmen admitted. The plan was simple: convince you that you couldn't give her a child, then claim there were better specialists in the capital. That way, she'd get the move she wanted. A week later, Arturo arrived at Isabel's door with a bouquet of wildflowers. "These flowers survive in the harshest conditions, like you. I want us to build our family on the same strong foundation." The wedding was small and heartfelt. Maria beamed beside Carmen. The two mothers had bonded instantly. That hiking trip turned out to be life-changing, Elena joked. Maybe I should give it a try? I wouldn't recommend my exact route, Isabel laughed, gently resting a hand on her belly. There are easier ways to find happiness than falling off a cliff. Their townhouse in the Valle Verde eco-community had a terrace that opened to a ridge of mountains. Isabel decorated the nursery with her own watercolor paintings, a talent that had unexpectedly surfaced during pregnancy. The baby boy was born at dawn, just as the sun's first rays touched the mountain peaks. What shall we name him? Arturo asked. Ramon, she said without hesitation. 6 months later. A warm summer evening. Isabel sat on the terrace, holding her son, telling him stories about the mountains and the man who had saved her. A courier arrived with a mysterious package, no return address. Inside was a hand-carved wooden figure of a mountain eagle and a note. I found my path down too. I help others who are lost now. Thank you for showing the way. Ramon. Isabel pressed the carving to her heart. The circle had closed. Healing had reached everyone touched by this story, even Diego, who, she had heard, was now truly working at the reformed Aguas Tranquilas.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.